Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I've got my good friend John on, and John Rossman's got four-time best-selling author, keynote speaker. John brings it. He's one of those guys that I look up to as I grow. He helps me, take another step in life. You're going to have fun with this podcast. He's going to really show you some great stuff. I'm currently reading his new book, Big Bet Leadership. It sits by my bedside. I'm eating it up pretty well. John, welcome to the show.
Anthony, thanks for bringing it. Thanks for having me on, man.
It's fun when we get together, get to talk a little bit about big ideas. You started early on with one of the coolest books I ever read, which was The Amazon Way, bestseller that was, kind of really hit the marketplace with some great ideas. You got some great insight on leadership. I'm going to dive into that today.
Cool. Well, yeah, I've been fortunate. I paid attention in class when I was at Amazon, and I saw so much about how to both be a world-class operator and a systematic innovator. And that's what one of the things that makes Amazon so unique is the scale of businesses. I mean, different categories, different industries, and their ability to apply kind of the same playbook across all of those industries and still trying to resist the gravity of bureaucracy that is so natural in any organization of scale. So I learned so much when I was there, and my mission has really been to help bring systems and approaches to other companies and other leaders to take advantage of some of that really unique playbook.
What's amazing about Amazon is the scale by which the multiple businesses are going. This is the hardest one for me. I mean, look, as an entrepreneur, I sometimes get to a point where you grow a business and you're like, right? You just want to maintain it where it's at. You don't want the biggest fear becomes not going backwards, right? And what Amazon did was really continue to go another step and then another step and another step. That bold behavior, let's talk about that. How do you break through that mindset that says, all right, I've taken a step, and then stopping and getting on defense rather than continue on the offense?
Well, yeah, I think what you have to understand is the very natural human biases that are at play and finding ways of counterbalancing those very centered, very normal human biases. So the biases that I'm thinking about, the first one is incrementalism, right? Incrementalism is the natural tendency for a person or a group of people that once they have something figured out, something that's working for them, the natural inclination is just to keep it as is and maybe do a little bit of improvement around the edges versus taking on a new endeavor. So that's incrementalism, which is tied to, the innovator's dilemma, right? Which was a paradox framed by Clayton Christensen, which is the essence of that is that the innovative model and energy and calculated risk taking that got us to where we are actually traps us and makes us blind to new models that are typically leveraging disruptive technologies and a low cost model to disrupt from the bottom. So that's the innovator's dilemma. The next is short-termism, right? So short-termism is both personally and as a business, the very natural orientation to prioritize short-term benefits over long-term benefits. Even when we know that something causes long-term harm, we will prioritize short-term benefits. And then the last one I'll mention is kind of incrementalism, right? Which is, or not incrementalism, is incentive systems. So incentive systems, every incentive system in business is oriented us towards short-term thinking and short-term results. So those set of biases, we have to find ways to counterbalance those biases.
Well, let's step into each one because I think that it's good for us to see it. Look, it's good for me to see it. I mean, hey, all you entrepreneurs out there, this is one of those places where you've got a world-leading expert, keynote speaker. Look, this is time. Get a pen out, right? This is one of those places where you're going to pick up some tidbits that you can work on. Or I take them on. I'm writing them all down because look, there's stuff that I get to work on as a leader. And if we all know that the leader is the one who holds back an organization. And why do we do that? John's going to show you that. And this is what's really amazing about it, right? Like I start to see how am I at cause for what's going on with the company that I'm growing? Right. And John, I think that's a great place for us to, start thinking and, or just kind of dive into that a little bit.
Well, can you reframe the question again, Anthony?
So if I'm looking at myself as a leader in each of these little aspects that are holding me back, right? The incrementalism, the incentives. If I look at each one of those, why do we do it, and how do I see it and take another step, right? Because at one point I was bold, right? I took big, bold bets, and I bet the farm on. I mean, I can't tell you how many times as an entrepreneur I have let out all of the line. I mean, like literally, I always call it down to the knot. You guys ever know that expression where you go fishing and you let all the line goes out, and the only thing holding that fish on is the knot at the end of the string? Right. There's been times in business where I literally have been down to the knot, and that's, this, crazy spot to be in, and then just luckily got a hook and then got it going and reeled it back in. But, sometimes in business, big, bold moves to do an idea. Sometimes as you get older, you start to get a little bit more like, I don't want to let all that out.
And that's the natural kind of risk aversion of like, well, once we have something as an individual and as a business, we stop taking calculated risks. And that's really why I wrote Big Bet Leadership, was to help business leaders appropriately take calculated risks relative to the business, but do it in a way that doesn't actually bet the farm. So the big is the ambition. The bet is the experimental way in which we prove things out before we make big commitments to them. And if you can have that framework of both being a world-class operator and a portfolio of concepts of what the future might be and how I might participate, and be working those concepts, you're going to recognize opportunities. You're going to test them out before you make big commitments to them. And it actually fires up the brain, and it fires up the ambition. And so that's how my answer to how you counteract these very human natural biases.
There's this, a lot of times I get this analysis paralysis.
Yeah.
Right? You get to some place, it's like, how many books have you read, Good to Great, where you get this, we're doing good, but to get to great, that next level, it's going to take another, you have to take another step, and that next step comes with being an idiot a little bit, right? Jordan Peterson says it great, in order to be the master, you got to be an idiot again, right? And that new business venture, that new idea comes with a little bit of idiotness, right? Or however you want to describe it yourself.
Well, it's also called the beginner's mind, right? Like, it's a powerful place to be.
Yeah. Right. It truly lights you up. I'm in the middle of it now, a 28-year-old company. And now I feel like we're like a startup again, right? We just taken another step, right? From the company we were to another bold step. And, I'm in the middle of that right now. And I'm not going to tell you that some days it's not friendly, right? Because it fires out. It's like, it's amazing and scary and amazing and scary. But what's funny about it is, I think as I'm older, I've been through this battle so many times. I know that I've made it through the scariest moments in business. So I guess there is some gift there. So I think we do have that as entrepreneurs that are continuing to grow, right? There is the one in us who's kind of been there before. That mindset's maybe a little bit scary, but there's also times when we failed. So both come up, right? I don't know about you, but both come up when I'm tackling a new growth strategy.
Well, if you think of everything as an experiment, failure becomes a lot more of the learning process, right? Failure is a tricky word. I don't like using it with my clients because it means both we experimented in the experiment, we learned something from the experiment, but it also means we failed to execute appropriately. And like that, one's what we're yearning for, the other is what we're avoiding. So I think all of this comes down to understanding that you have to allocate time and resources to inventing the future. Big Bet Leadership proposes a way to do it, which is based off of Amazon's working backwards approach. And it's a memo-driven approach. And the power of calming the mind. You and I started with a short meditation before this podcast, right? Calming the mind, putting away all the digital distractions and the pressures of the day. And in business, in complex topics, writing out a memo to capture the problem, the killer feature that you would propose to solve this problem, why you would do it. That's the framework that we propose in the first section of the book called Thinking and Outcomes, right? And if you do this as a group, the power of essentially journaling hits an exponential curve of value, right? And so we propose a very specific set of memos to do to help you put away the busyness of your mind and the busyness of the day, allocate time to thinking through in a systematic way, capturing it so that you can debate it. That's actually experimentation that you are doing right there. But at the end of the day, it does come down to prioritization of time, right? And you do have to make a resource allocation decision. How much time, how much expense, how much of my people's time am I going to prioritize working on the future versus just working on today's business? That's a decision that most leaders are. They say they're going to do one thing, but then they act in a completely different way. And that's the hypocrisy that traps us in this, just hamster wheel of just hustling more for today versus inventing the future.
Well, I think my favorite line in the whole book is clarity is the most important strategitic advantage, right?
Yeah.
I think that you're like that creating that clarity, right? And that takes a second of, all that practice. So look, all of you guys that are afraid to get into the whatever practices you want to call it to slow your mind down, right? I mean, some people say lock yourself in a room with a book and don't spend time, write, a journal, write it out, write the memo to yourself, right? Creating clarity of vision, right? Starting to see that, right? And by the way, I don't know that it has to be 100% spelled out ever, but at least you got to get to the what's the leap look like, and then from there, look, I've been in business for a long time. I can move from there, right?
So, we propose in the book that there's 3 critical habits that a leader has to have in order to be a reinvention machine, right? To systematically attack the future. The first is, as you mentioned, is create clarity. If you do not have clarity, you are going to, if you proceed on kind of an innovation path, you're just going to be, kind of taking the Ray Charles approach of like blindly bumping into everything, right? You can experiment so much cheaper, faster, more effectively if you take on this kind of memo writing experimental approach. That helps you create clarity. One of the big jobs of leadership is to be able to communicate a situation, a mission to your stakeholders, right? Your employees, your customers, your partners, whoever it is. If you do not have clarity of thought as to this is the problem we are tracking and this is our hypothesis for what the future state is and the journey that we're going to go through, well, then what your default is you have to talk about kind of these empty calorie burning platforms like the industry is changing or we have to change. It means nothing. And in fact, it's worse than meaning nothing because everybody interprets it in their own way. And they tend to make the worst case scenario out of what you are going to say to them, right? Yeah. So as a leader, being able to communicate with nimbleness and subtlety of here's the problem. Here's the future state we think we are going to. Here's the experimental journey we're going on to. You're actually doing your job of leading the organization successfully through this transformation.
Well, it goes back to, do I want to lead by fear? Like fear pushes, to be pushed by fear does not motivate people very long. I mean, look, you scare people enough, they'll leave you. Right? People don't want to be beaten into fear. Like, let's go scare them with the world's ending if we don't change.
Yeah, right? Fear's not exciting, right?
Right. To me, it feels like you got to paint a vision that pulls people into it, right? Something that pulls people into a future that's exciting and new and like revolutionary and inspiring, right? When I pull with vision as opposed to push by fear, there's a much better, much bigger. Look, it's a much more fun team to be around, right?
Yeah. We have a chapter in the book that's kind of dedicated to kind of the communication techniques of champions. And, we talk about kind of the chief repeating officer and using stories as much more memorable ability. Of all of Jeff Bezos' superpowers that I got to see when I was at Amazon, I think the one that doesn't get enough attention is like the strategic communication skills that he have are legendary in my mind, starting with the very first Amazon shareholder letter, the 1990 shareholder letter, all of their little phrases, the leadership principles, which I captured in the Amazon way. All of those things are strategic communication to get alignment and habit of approach for a big organization. So, I think that this is one of the very natural and required superpowers if you're going to be a systematic innovator.
Yeah, it's most entrepreneurs can see the problems they want to solve. And I think that when you create a vision to solve it and you communicate that to folks, now you help them paint it. I think just a lot of entrepreneurs are stuck in they get in these micro positions and places where what they're working on isn't creating that idea. It's in places where, look, I've done it myself, where all of a sudden I'm in an HR role, and all of a sudden I'm in my accounting role, and those are places I need to be able to bounce in and out of, right? Don't get stuck there, right? I need to really be creating a vision for the company that I'm leading to go into, right? Something that really pulls the organization into it.
One of the common questions I get, kind of working with a team on kind of like, okay, we're going to, build a portfolio of concepts using this, is like, how do we make the time? And this re-rationalization of what meetings are needed, what are the inputs and outputs of meetings, how to create better hygiene relative to those meetings, is the re-rationalization, the zero-based design approach of replacing this continuous set of ineffective meetings with a rationalized set of highly effective meetings to make the time to be able to do this work in the future work that we are dedicated to. That's a lot of the work I do with some of my clients, is kind of like zero-based design your management team meetings and design them carefully and empower people to systematically run the business so that you can scale and apply your time to inventing the future.
Well, let's go a little bit more on that, because I'm not sure everybody got that. So go back to zero-based design.
In my experience, especially in corporate organizations, leaders are spending 70% or more of their time in meetings. Yeah. And if you ask them, what do you accomplish in each one of those meetings? They oftentimes can't even answer the question. And then if they can answer the question of what gets accomplished, does it get accomplished in the best way possible? Do you have to be there? And so zero-based design is a concept of throwing away everything that's there today. How would you reconstruct? What are the essential decision points that are required to run this meeting, right? Oh, we need a finance meeting once a quarter to do things. Oh, we need a sales and operations planning meeting, often referred to as S&OP, once a week. We need this meeting once a week. Well, now you've identified the need. Now you carefully design, well, what's the purpose of this meeting? What are the inputs and outputs to it? Who needs to be there? How do we actually run the meeting and make sure that we have the proper inputs so that we have an effective meeting that drives the effective outputs? Having that end-to-end kind of logic chain of, the rhythm of the business. That's also called an operating model sometimes for a business. Cleaning that out, reestablishing what the operating model is, a great way to make the organization run better and create accountability. It also has this funny effect of making people more pliable, right? Just because we used to do it this way doesn't mean it's the right thing to do going forward. And so creating an organization that's consistently rethinking how we go about something, like that has a lot of benefits to it versus being just like, this is how we do it, right? Hamster wheel, right? Like, this is how we do it every single day. Creating organizational pliability, the ability to make change, like that is a key muscle category that's needed in many organizations.
Well, you get these like bleeding deacons who've been doing it the same way over and over. And they want to preach it. Oh my God, we're changing my structure, and they're, like somehow or another, the attachment to the way that we had it.
Well, I mean that's incrementalism and short-termism and hubris that is what infects successful organizations. So I just released a free ebook called "The Pig, the Lipstick, and the Playbook of Champions." And
the pig and the lipstick.
And what it does is it frame names and claims this very challenge of successful organizations. The pig and the lipstick is the problem, right? The pig is the fact that we're a successful company. We're used to success. We start playing a risk aversion to it and everything. The lipstick is the lies that we tell ourselves, the lies like, oh, we're going to grow better next year. We're going to be more customer centric. We're going to be innovative. No, you're not. You're optimizing for today's business. The Playbook of Champions is about resetting the foundation of your mission and your people, your chasing of perfections. How do you not demand perfection, but realize you have to chase perfection in order to create operational excellence? And then the third section of the book is about this concept of like having a portfolio set of big bets. So it's a free downloadable. You can search for it, The Pig, the Lipstick, and the Playbook of Champions, or come to my website, John Rossman, and find it. But that is the challenge of most of these businesses, is like they become kind of hubris and stuck in their ways.
Now I got to look. I'm downloading. By the way, folks, I'll put a link down to that in the bio, so you don't have to go very far to find it. Go down there, download it. Look, I look forward to grabbing that, because I think those are like the signs I want to hold up, right? The ones I want to hold up, and just check myself. I start with myself, and then look at the leadership group and go, look, how are we doing this? What are we chasing excellence? Are we going after that, or are we just reliving the past again? Right? I mean, is this, I always call it fish in a fish tank. A fish, float around, kind of going around going, oh, look, bubbles. Oh, look, bubbles. Right? It's the same thing over, and we bring up it's kind of a racket, right? Where we complain about the same things over and over again. It's like, great, what are you going to change? Start. Let's have that not happen next week.
Man, there's an art to people's ability to complain about the current state, but not willing to actually be solution oriented and like, okay, how would we change it? And I've worked with a lot of healthcare clients, and in particular, the healthcare industry seems to have a lot of this kind of complaining about the current state, but really not having a point of view about, well, what specifically would you do differently? And then how would we test it and roll it out, and everything. But yeah, that kind of complaining about the current state, like I can take just a moment of that.
Well, but the thing though, as I'm in that room a lot where we're trying to break those things through, right? We're going through an idea breakthrough, and there are those champions that are with me. They're shoulder to shoulder with me. They're marching on them. And then you got the anchors, right? You got the ones that are in the room that are like, nope, that's ridiculous. And they can't. I was in a room yesterday with a guy who was holding the whole group back, right? Hey, look, he's the one department. He's not willing to go into the new software package. Look, I do it just fine the way I'm doing it. Don't make me do that stuff. I'm a deal maker. Everybody's happy with the deals I'm making. I'm not going to do that this way. And now all of a sudden he's holding back. The rest of the group wants to march forward on this platform, and they're all excited about it. And clarity of vision, sight, and process. Everybody can see it. But then you got this one guy who's trying to hold it back, and you got to make this little. You got to either kick the. It's tough, right? Because you got a relationship with this person who may or may not be doing fine, but it's going to hold back the whole group if you don't.
Well, that's where, I think a set of principles can be really helpful. And the principles should capture, how do we feel about making change? Like, where do we put that on the priority list of the things that are important? And do we expect leaders to have both an operational mindset and an innovative mindset? And we all know that the most dangerous person in a culture is the highly successful person who is either toxic, they get results done, but in the wrong way, or they're unwilling to think big for the business. They're just optimizing essentially for themselves. And that's where you're going to have to make some decisions about, well, maybe that person, we just let that person optimize for what they're doing, and we don't include them in this reinvention exercise. Or they're toxic. They're gonna rot the apple. And that's when leadership principles really matter, is when you have to make a decision that has negative short-term financial implications. Like, that's leadership right there, and everything, right? And I'm not saying what the right answer is, but you should have a framework for how you're going to think through those types of situations.
Well, I think you get better and better as you do it. You get that. You trigger that muscle, right? It takes a little bit to go through it, and the attachments to the.
One of the great ways to tackle this as an executive team is to have a book club, right? Like, grab a book that kind of, I'll suggest Big Bet Leadership, but there's a variety of books that you could do. But read the book as a team, and then talk about, well, what does it mean for us? Like, what's our version of this? That's one of the killer slow burner moves of creating a team that is thinking about this stuff and starts to build that pliability and that method of how we are going to do something. So that would be one way I would work with a team that maybe has a few traditionalists and a few naysayers to it.
Now, it's fun. It's fun to have a group of people that are all, the book club. I love that when all of us are looking at different ideas, right, and bringing that to the table. It's fun, right? Because that's, fresh ideas are really ultimately, look, if I keep doing what I've been doing, I'm going to keep getting what I've been getting. If I want to go somewhere different, I've got to bring some new content. I got to bring some new ideas and new processes. And
that's why I focus so much of my time and attention on writing books, is because a good book, it can change minds, and everything, right?
Change lives.
Change lives. I've had so many cool messages over the years about how the Amazon way, or Think Like Amazon, or Big Bet Leadership have impacted somebody's career or the business they run, or how they think about things. And that's just the best feedback you can ever get as an author. But that's why I've done it, is because it's a scalable way to help create change.
Think about, those books right now I'm having so much fun with Big Bet Leadership, but think about some of the books that have impacted your life, right? I mean, one of the first ones I ever had was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That book, was my first.
So in Big Bet Leadership, we kind of talk about
that's right.
three books that really impacted us. The first is what I think is the best strategy book out there, which is called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And it will fundamentally change the way you think about how to do an annual plan or how to create a strategy and everything, right? And Richard Rumalt talks about, you have to understand the problem and then have a principled approach for, how do we solve that problem? And then a set of tactics in how you're going to express that principle. That's essentially the problem solving technique. We add in experimentation and how to actually do that. What's the problem? What's the principled approach to it? And then add experimentation to it. But that book is one that has impacted me greatly.
I think about some of them, extreme ownership. Look, the whole book wasn't I think Jocko talks a lot about his military stuff, which is kind of fun with the stories, but the extreme ownership part of that was really great. It was like another one of those ones where, you could see how my thoughts, actions, behaviors really affected the missions that we're going to send my people on. And it just another one of those great books. And I think that each time I read a book like yours, it just really does light up the synapses, really change the thinking pattern that I've had, brings a new, synaptic system into play that now I can share with others and start to create bigger, bolder ideas. And I think that's ultimately what great leaders do, is that you need to be able to bring, the resources of the world to the problems that you're solving. I think a lot of us get myopic, right? And they kind of get stuck in just one way of being, and they keep reliving the same old, we take our past, right? And it could project into our future, and we keep reliving that same way of being. And you're like, okay, I wonder why, I keep doing this.
Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, who's led a big both business turnaround as well as transformation of a highly successful company that suffered from a lot of these ailments that we've talked about and everything. He talked about the key thing he's been trying to drive is that he's had to get Microsoft to shift from being a know-it-all company to be a learn-it-all company. And I think that mindset of like, how do we become a learn-it-all leader creates that nimbleness and pliability that we're talking about individually, in a team, in your business. Like that's everything we're talking about here today.
Fun. John, I got to tell you, it's fun having you. If folks want to have you come and be a keynote speaker for their company, right, and come do your magic with them, what's the best way for them to come get you and have you come speak with their company?
Yeah, so I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, John Rossman, or go to johnrossman.com, and easy to get in contact. And I am humbled by the opportunities to get to come and work with teams. And I don't take it lightly. I work really hard to understand the situation and the audience. And so it's a great honor to get to do that.
Well, it's just the work that you're doing with some of the biggest companies in the country it's amazing. Your ability to really bring a clarity of vision and help them come and create clarity of vision and a focus on developing those ideas. It's legendary. It's why I love having you on there. I'm grateful to have you come on this podcast. I'm humbled by you being here today, and one of my favorite authors. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for sharing your platform.
John, as always, great gratitude. Everybody, all John's books will be down in the links below. Make sure you get that. Also, his link to The Pig, the Lipstick, and the
Playbook of Champions.
And the Playbook of Champions will be a link down there as well. Make sure you jump and grab that link. So thank you, John. Thanks for being on today.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Hey, audience, last week we broke 65,000 subscribers, blowing me away. It makes a world of difference. But we noticed that a lot of you guys made it to the end of the podcast, and some of you guys still weren't subscribers. Look, it makes a world of difference, and it gets us great speakers like John to come on a podcast with our numbers. I know it's not a big deal, but it does make a difference with us and the people that we're able to attract to the podcast. So if you could take a second and like and subscribe and do that now, I'd be so grateful. I know Lissa and Joe and all the team in the background that put this podcast together, they work tirelessly to find us great speakers like John. So if you could do that now, I would be grateful. And as always, thanks for listening.